3 frightening winter stories to keep you awake. Tell late night story. When the night falls and snow blankets the earth in eerie silence, another world begins to stir. It's a world where darkness stretches longer than the daylight, where the cold isn't just felt on your skin, but deep within your very soul. You might think of winter as a season of peace and stillness. Think again. Amidst the frozen landscapes, hidden behind barren trees and lonely cabins, are tales that will make you hesitate before turning off the light. In this video, we'll take you on a chilling journey through blizzards of terror. So hold tight. Don't let the icy stillness lull you to sleep, because when the snow starts falling, the real nightmares might only be beginning. Story 1. The Cry in the Snow. Let me take you back to a night that still haunts me, a night that makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a veterinary technician in a small town nestled deep in the woods of upstate New York. It was mid-December, and the snow had been falling relentlessly for days, blanketing everything in a thick, eerie silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. That night, I was driving home after a long shift, my car's headlights cutting through the swirling snowflakes. The roads were empty, and the world felt unnaturally still, as if it were holding its breath. As I approached a stretch of road that cut through the dense forest, I felt it, a shift in the air. It was subtle at first, like a faint pressure in my chest, but it grew heavier with every passing second. The trees loomed on either side of the road, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. My radio, which had been playing softly, suddenly crackled and went silent. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just the weather playing tricks on me, but then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the cry of a child. It was faint, almost muffled by the snow, but unmistakable. My heart raced as I slowed the car, peering into the darkness. There was no way a child could be out here, not in this weather, not in the middle of nowhere. I told myself to keep driving, to ignore it, but something inside me wouldn't let me. Maybe it was my training as a vet tech, that instinct to help those in need, or maybe it was something deeper, something primal. Against my better judgment, I pulled over and stepped out into the freezing night. The cold hit me like a slap, biting at my skin as I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the snow-covered ground. The cry came again, louder this time, and it seemed to be coming from deep within the woods. I hesitated, my breath visible in the frigid air, but I couldn't turn back now. I followed the sound, my boots crunching in the snow, the trees closing in around me. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew denser, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. The snow underfoot felt softer, almost like it was trying to pull me down. And then I saw it, a small, tattered blanket half buried in the snow. My heart sank as I picked it up, the fabric icy to the touch. It was old, frayed at the edges, and stained with something dark. I didn't want to think about what it might be. That's when I felt it, the sensation of being watched. It was like 1,000 invisible eyes were on me, boring into my soul. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the trees, but there was nothing there, just shadows and snow. The cry had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on me like a weight. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of there as fast as I could. I stumbled back toward the road, my heart pounding in my chest, the blanket still clutched in my hand. When I finally reached my car, I threw the blanket into the back seat and drove off, my hands trembling on the wheel. The feeling of being watched didn't go away though. It followed me all the way home, like a shadow I couldn't shake. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blanket, heard the cry, felt those unseen eyes on me. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the stress of work and the isolation of the winter were getting to me. but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I went back to the spot where I'd found the blanket, hoping to convince myself it had all been a dream. But the blanket was gone, and there were no footprints in the snow, not even mine. It was as if I'd never been there at all. I've tried to put that night behind me, but sometimes when the snow falls and the world goes quiet, I hear that cry again. And I wonder, what was it trying to tell me? What was out there in the woods, watching me, waiting for me? So I leave you with this question. Have you ever felt that inexplicable dread, that sense of being watched when no one is there? What would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? Would you have followed the cry, or would you have driven away, leaving the mystery buried in the snow? Let me know your thoughts, because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that stay with us long after they're over. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2, Frozen Shadows, a disturbing winter tale. I'm Alex, 28 years old, and I work as a delivery driver in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Alaska. Winters here are no joke. The temperatures can drop so low that even your breath feels like it's freezing solid. The roads, often slick and treacherous, snake through endless forests and desolate stretches of tundra. It's a land of stunning beauty, but also one that demands constant vigilance. Still, I thought I had the rhythm of it figured out. That night, however, proved just how quickly the icy silence can become something far more sinister. I had just finished a delivery at a remote northern town and was heading back south. My van, a beaten-up old model that had seen better days, was rattling along the dark highway. I remember checking the clock on the dashboard, 10:45 p.m. The stars were bright and the snow-covered trees sparkled in the faint moonlight. The solitude was almost peaceful until the van hit a patch of black ice. It all happened in slow motion. I felt the wheels lose traction. The vehicle spun once, then skidded off the side of the road, plunging into a snowbank. When the movement stopped, I realized my front tires were completely buried in the heavy, compacted snow. I stepped out of the van into the biting cold, my breath clouding the air. The wind whispered through the trees, and the only sound was the faint crunch of snow beneath my boots. Grabbing a flashlight, I surveyed the damage. The tires were hopelessly stuck. I didn't have chains or a shovel. My phone showed 0 bars, and the company-issued radio crackled with nothing but static. For a long moment, I just stood there, the realization sinking in. I was utterly alone in the middle of nowhere. Then, far in the distance, I heard it, the low rumble of an engine. My heart lifted at the sound. Through the swirling snow, I saw bright headlights cutting through the darkness. It was a snowplow, its heavy machinery lumbering toward me. The vehicle stopped behind my van, and a tall man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 50s, wearing a worn gray beanie and a heavy coat. His face was weathered and lined, the kind you'd expect from someone who spent years battling the elements. "You all right there?" he asked, his voice rough but seemingly friendly. Relief washed over me. "Yeah, I just lost control on the ice," I replied. "I could really use a hand." He nodded, his boots crunching in the snow as he walked over to inspect the van. At first, I felt lucky. Here was someone who might get me back on the road, but as he examined my vehicle, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. His movements were slow and deliberate, too deliberate. His eyes lingered on me longer than they should have. When he asked where I was headed, it wasn't just casual conversation. It felt probing, as if he already knew the answer. He offered to help pull my van out, but his tone had shifted. There was something in his voice that made my skin crawl, something almost predatory. When I mentioned calling for a tow truck, he chuckled, low, mirthless. "Out here?" he said. "No one's coming for hours, maybe days. But don't worry, I'll take care of you." I tried to keep the conversation polite, but my unease grew. His questions became more personal, more unsettling. He asked where I lived, what route I normally took. I began stepping back toward my van, trying to put some distance between us. Then he took a step closer, his shadow stretching long in the snow under the headlights. I told him I was fine, that I could wait it out until morning. His smile faded, replaced by a flat, unreadable expression. That was when he grabbed my arm. His grip was icy and strong. I wrenched free and bolted toward the forest. The snow was deep, and every step felt like a battle. Behind me, I heard his heavy boots pounding after mine, his voice calling my name. I don't know how he knew it, but the way he said it chilled me to my core. "Alex," he growled, the sound carrying through the trees. "You can't run forever." I didn't dare look back. Branches scratched my arms and face as I tore through the underbrush. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting strange, shifting shadows. I could still hear him, but his footsteps were growing fainter. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to keep moving. Finally, in the distance, I saw a faint glow, a cabin. I stumbled toward it, my knees buckling as I reached the porch. I banged on the door, and an old man answered. His silver beard and soft eyes were a stark contrast to the nightmare I'd just fled. He pulled me inside, wrapped a heavy wool blanket around my shoulders, and handed me a mug of hot tea. I could barely speak, but I managed to choke out what had happened. He nodded gravely and immediately called the police. When they arrived, the snowplow driver was gone. His vehicle had vanished, and the only evidence he'd ever been there were faint tire tracks that disappeared into the forest. The officers tried to assure me that I was safe, that I'd been lucky to escape, but as they escorted me home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. A few days later, I found something in my van's glove compartment that didn't belong there, a gray beanie. I hadn't put it there. And when I held it, it felt colder than anything I'd ever touched. So I have to ask, what would you have done in my place? If you found yourself on an empty winter road, would you trust the first person who stopped to help, or would you run? Story 3, In the Shadow of the Snow, A Winter's Nightmare. That year I was 28. It was supposed to be my big break. My dream was to capture nature's raw beauty in the harshest conditions. Images that would set me apart, that would show the world I wasn't just another hobbyist with a camera. I wanted my work to speak for itself, to evoke emotion, to make people feel the biting cold of a winter morning just by looking at a photograph. I thought, where better to do that than in the rugged, snow-covered wilderness of Bar Harbor, Maine. I found the cabin online. It looked exactly like what I had envisioned. Small, rustic, nestled deep within a forest that stretched for miles. The photos showed a wood stove in the corner, a single bed against the far wall, and a few cozy touches that made it seem inviting, but not too comfortable. Just the kind of place where I could hunker down and focus solely on my craft. There was no cell reception, no Wi-Fi, and the nearest neighbor was reportedly a few miles away. Perfect. I booked it for 2 weeks, packed my gear, and headed out. The drive to the cabin was uneventful, though the roads grew narrower and the forest thicker as I got closer. By the time I arrived, the sun was just starting to set, casting a warm orange glow over the snow-covered pines. I unloaded my gear quickly, eager to settle in before it got too dark. The air was crisp, the silence profound. It was exactly what I had wanted, just me, my camera, and nature. The first few days went by without incident. I spent the daylight hours wandering through the woods, photographing snow-laden branches, frozen streams, and the occasional deer that ventured close enough for me to capture. The cabin was small, but cozy enough. The wood stove kept it warm, and I found it surprisingly easy to adjust to the solitude. At night, I reviewed the day's shots, made notes about lighting and composition, and planned where I'd head the next day. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt, how good it was to be disconnected from the chaos of everyday life, but by the third night, things began to feel different. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a vague unease, a sense that I was being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, I was alone in a remote cabin in the middle of winter. It was natural to feel a little on edge. I told myself I was imagining things, and I went back to reviewing my photos. That's when I heard it, a faint crunching sound coming from outside. It was subtle at first, almost drowned out by the occasional pop of the wood stove. I paused, listening. Another crunch, then another, slow, deliberate. I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a fox or a deer. I got up, peered out the window, but all I could see was darkness and snow. Still, the sound persisted. It seemed to move, circling the cabin. My chest tightened as I stood there, waiting for it to stop. Eventually, it did. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me, and I went to bed. But I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I checked around the cabin. The snow was untouched. No footprints, no tracks, nothing to indicate anyone or anything had been there. I tried to convince myself I had been hearing things, that it was just the creaking of the wood as the temperature dropped. And yet, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Still, I carried on. I spent the day taking more photos, trying to distract myself from the nagging sense of unease. That night, the sound returned. This time, it was louder, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it out the window. Nothing. I stepped outside, shining the beam around the cabin. Again, no tracks, no movement. Just the silent trees and the snow reflecting the pale moonlight. I stood there for a long moment, listening. When the sound didn't come back, I went inside, locked the door, and tried to focus on my work. But my mind was racing. Was someone out there? If so, why wouldn't they just come to the door? What could they possibly want? And if it wasn't a person, what was it? Over the next few days, things escalated. The footsteps became more frequent, and I started to notice other oddities. One night, I found the front door slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had locked it. Another time, my camera bag, which I always kept on the table by the window, was on the floor as if it had been knocked over. I began to hear faint whispers, indistinct, just on the edge of perception, like someone talking to themselves or perhaps to me. My nerves were fraying. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, my stomach in knots. The solitude I had once found so peaceful now felt oppressive, suffocating. By the sixth night, I was at my wit's end. I locked all the doors and windows, barricaded myself in the bedroom, and sat in the corner clutching a flashlight. That's when I heard the scratching. It was slow and deliberate, like fingernails dragging across glass. The sound came from the window next to the bed. I held my breath, my pulse racing. The scratching continued, unrelenting, and then it stopped. A moment later, I heard a voice, low, hoarse, and impossibly close. "I know you're in there." I don't know how long I sat there frozen. I don't even remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the first light of dawn was filtering through the curtains. The scratching was gone. The voice was gone. I packed my things in record time, threw them in the car, and left that cabin without looking back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I could have sworn I saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me. But I didn't stop. I didn't want to know. Since then, I've never stayed alone in a remote cabin again. The memory of that place still haunts me. The photographs I took during that trip, I've never been able to look at them. They sit in a folder on my hard drive untouched, like a wound I can't bear to reopen. Even now, I sometimes wake up at night, heart pounding, sure that I've heard those same slow, deliberate footsteps outside my window. I tell myself it's nothing, just the wind, just my imagination. But deep down, I know better. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC, the Place of the Brave, now and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the Place of the Brave are always waiting, and they never rest. Good luck sleeping tonight.